Numbers can lie. Let's start this conversation with the apples to oranges issue. Those who advocate for self-publishing will often talk about how great it is that as a self-publisher, you can get 70% of the list price of the book. So if I sell a book at $4.99, I presumably get $3.50. Amazon charges delivery charges, so with image-heavy books, that's not always the case. The same advocates of self-publishing point to the payout percentages on the trade publishing side and say, look at all that money you're giving up. You get 10% of your hardcover list price, 6% of your paperback, and 30% of your ebook. And then you have to pay an agent 15%. Well, I get 70%. You're a fool to give away that much money. The main critique of this comparison is that a trade-published author doesn't have to pay for their book production costs. If you do and you aren't self-publishing, you are likely dealing with a bad publisher and need to get out of there. So the argument is that yes, the trade publishing payout percentages are lower, but a self-publisher is paying for editing, covers, and advertising out of that 70%. And it's actually 35% if you're not in the $2.99 to $9.99 range on Amazon. Whereas presumably a trade-published author is not paying for any of these things. Although I know many who do pay for things like book swag, promoting their Facebook or Twitter page, and their own book tours. The bigger difference, though, which is not discussed as often, is that trade publishing is actually on a completely different payment model, at least when advances are being paid. So I can look at some book and say, gee, that book only sold 1,000 copies and at $9.99 and you had 30% payout, then you only earned $3,000. That sucks. And that author can, rightly, laugh and tell me that no, they were paid a $10,000 advance. That's where the bulk of the money is paid on the trade side. Now, ideally, an author earns out their advance and eventually starts receiving royalty checks on top of that advance. But many never do. That advance is what they earn. And that advance is more than the payout percent times number of units sold times price. Or else they'd have earned out their advance and be getting royalty payments. If you don't know the advance someone was paid for their book, you don't know what they've made on that book. Not to mention, those percentages I gave above are not set in stone. You would have to see someone's contract and sales numbers to really know what they'd earned on a book. So you can't really compare self-pub to trade pub numbers that easily, not with what's publicly available. Now let's talk about how numbers can lie. One of the things people like to brag about on the trade publishing side is the number of print runs a book has had. You'll see someone say, we're going back for our 5th printing, which does mean that the book did better than expected. The key there, though, is what was expected. Which is the more successful book? The one with one print run of 50,000 copies that sells 49,000 copies, or the one with 5 print runs totaling 5,000 books that sells 4,900 copies. Of course, this gets back to not comparing yourself to people who don't write what you write. Not every genre commands a 50,000 book print run, right? And on the trade side, there's an issue with meeting your publisher's expectations. So the one that had 5 print runs is probably exceeding expectations, where the one with 1 print run isn't. But in terms of sheer numbers sold and money earned, the 1 print run author made more. Now let's turn our attention to the self-publishing side of things. The first big issue with talking numbers in self-publishing is that a lot of the time, people want to talk about how many copies they've sold or how much they've made. And that's fine. I get it. Those are the exciting numbers. But which is more impressive? Selling 10,000 copies at 99 cents or 1,000 copies at $7.99? I know which one I'd rather have. If I sell 1,000 copies at $7.99, I make somewhere around $5,500. If I sell 10,000 copies at 99 cents, I make around $3,500. And the customers who are willing to pay $7.99 are probably much more loyal to me than the ones who only paid 99 cents. But 10,000 sure sounds more impressive than 1,000. So you have to be careful when you hear those numbers. And with some, you have to check to make sure they didn't include books they gave away for free. Although I think that isn't as common as it once was. Also, and this is changing now, but a lot of self-publishers will talk about the gross amount they've made and won't include expenses. They'll say, "I've made 6 figures self-publishing." And it's a weird number they're using because it's almost always the amount they received after the distributors took their cut. So it's not even really gross earnings, it's cash in hand. What gets left out of that number is promotional costs and production costs. I had 2 series that grossed almost the exact same amount. But one was still in the red because of production costs, while the other was very much in the black. If I just talked about how much I'd made, you wouldn't know that. There are some people who make $10,000 a month, but spend $9,500 to get there. It sounds really great to make $10,000 a month. $500 a month? Not so much. So when people tell you how they're doing, if they don't tell you the net after promotion, and to a lesser extent production, they're really not telling you anything you can judge by. Now, lest anyone think I'm throwing shade at anyone who has good numbers, I'm not. Anyone who has sold 1 million copies of their books has done something worth noting, whether that was at 99 cents or $9.99. All I'm saying is that if you want to compare numbers between authors or emulate what an author did to achieve success, you need to see the whole picture. I'd much rather take the path that will make me a living wage than the one that will sell me a lot of copies but not pay my utility bill. I'll throw another one out there while we're at it. Number of titles published. At the beginning of this book, I mentioned how many titles I've published. It seems impressive, right? Over 100 titles. Well, it is and it isn't. Because a lot of those titles are short stories or shorter nonfiction. It's not like I've written 100 novels. There are some publishers who have. That is impressive. Many people fail to realize that with self-publishing, you can publish anything. Long, short, it doesn't matter. So they come to self-publishing with a mindset of only thinking about novels and not thinking about shorter works. Once again, details matter. If you want to ask, how many titles did you publish before you made X? That's not a good question to ask with self-publishing. Because the title could be a 2,000-word short story or a 250,000-word epic fantasy. And those two will perform very differently from one another in terms of sales. Which brings me to a final point about numbers. always be leery about the surveys that come out of the self-publishing world. I write under 8 pen names and have a variety of titles under each, but I have yet to see a survey that acknowledges that nuance. They all ask how many titles you've published this year and how much you spent on advertising, for example, without giving an opportunity to break that down by pen name. I have some pen names I barely advertise. Others I advertise heavily. Some have no new releases in a year. Others do. If I just answer as me and don't split all that out, it gives a false picture because each pen name operates separate from the others. They don't feed each other. If I publish 4 books in a year under one name and in one series, that will have different results than publishing 4 books in a year under 4 different names. People mean well, but most of the surveys I've seen are not done well. So I don't participate in them anymore, which is not to say that the numbers you see are lies. You can do very, very well in self-publishing. There are authors who make 6 figures a month self-publishing. Not many, but they do exist. There are even more authors who make 6 figures a year self-publishing. The caution I am giving here is to not trust the data on what it took to get there. Genre matters. Writing in a series matters. Frequency of release matters. Price point matters. Promotion matters. Networking matters. I have yet to see a survey that adequately accounts for all of it. So numbers are good. You just need to understand what the numbers are actually telling you on either the trade or self-publishing sides. And I should add that on the trade side, because of the ability of bookstores to later return books, that number of units initially sold may have nothing to do with number of units ultimately sold. Okay, onward.